In this video, Simon and Helen share some of their reflections on the ECIS Leadership Conference. Our theme of culture and change will lead us into next year, and we hope that colleagues will join us as we continue the conversation through our new ECIS Culture Special Interest Group that will launch in September.
Welcome to the latest recording for ECIS as part of the Special Interest Group looking at the leadership of school culture. My name is Simon O'Connor. I am the director of Deira International School here in Dubai, and I'm joined by Helen Morgan. Helen, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, good morning, Simon. Hello, everybody. My name is Helen Morgan. I'm head of International Consultancy at ECIS, and it's really good to be here with you today.
Thank you. So the purpose of the next few minutes is just really to pick up. Many of you may have seen the discussions that we had in the lead up to the conference, the ECIS conference, and it's really to pull back some of those thoughts that we have following the conference, which was such an amazing event, a bit of a whirlwind over a few days, to pull those thoughts together, but also to look at what we're going to be talking about next term after what I'm sure for all of us is a much awaited summer break. So Helen, the conference was in Düsseldorf a few weeks ago. It was focusing on school culture. And I think one of the things that was most powerful for me was the diversity of talks that took place. But tell me a little bit, I mean, what are the particular things that you thought about and you took away from it?
Yeah, it was, I mean, the conference for me was so interesting because, like you said, we had lots of people from lots of different global contexts, organizations, so not just from schools. But I think for me, one of the really kind of strong setups was the first keynote from Lucia.
Yeah.
And her opening gambit for me was really powerful, which is if you want to get the culture right, not just in a school, but in an organization, we need to begin by just treating smart people like they're smart and being really respectful in the way that we begin to work with each other. And I think we read a lot, don't we, in education about cultures that aren't positive, you know, what people refer to as toxic cultures. And one of the things that really kind of resonated with me was when she talked about the fact that perfection is toxic, and how often you know, you find people who are really striving for perfection. You know, that they've got the perfection monster in their pocket that's right with them every step of the way. And how do we actually kind of move away from that towards cultures that are really inclusive, that value everybody's voice, that create that sense of safety and belonging? And how do we communicate and behave in ways that enable that, particularly from a leadership perspective, so we start to help that to permeate throughout? I don't know if that fits with any of your thinking.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just going to sort of come back a step first. I think for me, one of the wonderful things about the conference was that it's not a group. I'm relatively new to ECIS. I've done a lot of work with BSME and COBIS, but they're very much focused on British curriculum schools. And actually the opportunity to see and talk to people from a wide diversity of curriculum. Yeah, a lot of IB, but American curriculum, and also actually really nicely people I'd not met before. So it was an opportunity to get to know people as well. I completely agree about Lucia, and the nice thing actually I felt was, so Lucia has a huge amount of incredible experience working with very senior executives in the US, particularly corporate world. And actually the lessons that she was saying are so applicable to education. And exactly as you say, you know, behaving with integrity, recognizing that mistakes are opportunities for learning as opposed to something for which people should be condemned, treating people with respect. And now we've talked a lot about in the past, I've done a lot of work on some Simon Sinek's work, and actually that there was a huge amount of resonance in what he said, you know, starting with why. And I think when you take what she said and you apply it to an education perspective, it's particularly powerful, because I think from my experience, we sometimes make a mistake. Sinek, as I say, says talks about start with why. I think we presume that everyone knows that, and I think that's a mistake, because actually every school is different, every context is different. And as she said, you need to start with this. You need to make it clear why you're doing something and not presume that everyone understands that. And actually, if you make that clear, you make what your purpose is clear and the values upon which it's based, culture becomes so much more transparent. I'm not saying it's easy. I certainly haven't found the recipe for this, but it does become more transparent. It's less hidden, and people have a clear understanding of what they're doing. So absolutely right. I really enjoyed that talk. It was very powerful. And there were a couple of other keynotes as well that I felt were really interesting, about the way in which people are from such different contexts, the way in which they're trying to influence cultures in their school. And I suppose the crucial point is which is that context is everything. You know, I'm sitting in Dubai at the moment, you're sitting in the UK at the moment. If you and I were leading identical schools, which is a false premise anyhow, but the mere fact we're in different parts of the world with different contexts means that's, but I reflect that on my own circumstance. I also am Chief Education Officer for a small education group out here. We've got a small number of schools, but even though one of them is literally a kilometre down the road, therefore serving a very similar community, the fact that it's an American curriculum school means that they need to build their culture separately and differently to us. We can't just simply say, do this. It's not a one size fits all understanding. It's more complex than that, and it has to be contextualized. It was really interesting hearing that from such a diverse, different range of people at the conference itself.
Yeah, I think that whole kind of message of start with why was really strong through all of the keynotes and through a lot of the presentations. And I think for me, that level of, if you like, intentionality really kind of marks a shift where people are beginning to take culture seriously in schools and think about how they begin to influence it within their own context. And I think there's a lovely quotation from George Bernard Shaw about communication. I don't know if you've ever come across this, but it says the biggest illusion about communication is the fact that it ever took place. And you know, kind of I think one of the challenges of school leadership is leaders spend so much time often, you know, nurturing an idea, thinking about it, passing the ball around with it. And then you go to a staff meeting or an assembly with students or a parent meeting, and we try and share all of that nurture and thinking in about 10 minutes.
Yeah.
And I think we've got to think much more carefully, and that came through about how we communicate messages about culture and not land them.
As you know, and as we've discussed in the past, we've done a lot of work on culture at Deira International School over the last 18 months. And actually, one of the really nice things was actually doing a workshop and doing the keynote that I did, where we actually had to sit down and work out what we had done. And you suddenly realise actually it's been a really comprehensive amount of work. But there's that phrase which I can't quote exactly off the top, but basically says, with the best resources and the best staff in the best school, transformation of culture takes years. It's not a quick job. But I think the first thing actually to do is to recognise that there is a culture. There is always going to be a culture at your school. In any organisation, there's a culture. There's probably many cultures. And therefore, the first thing to do is to actually recognise that. And once you've recognised it, you can begin to actually influence it as well. And so, yeah, and I mean, coming back to the conference briefly, we should move on. But again, to see the workshops and actually the really instructive ways in which people were attempting to influence it was very powerful as well. Which leads on to the next question, really. I mean, with that conference, obviously we've got the break coming up, is to look at next steps. And we wanted to talk about the establishment really taking the special interest group and moving that forward. So what we're going to be doing at the beginning of next term is to put the council together that runs that special interest group. We've already got some names on it, but we're reaching out to some other people. And then really working out the next step for this. And I think the most important thing is to carry on the conversation. I don't think there's a magic bullet out there that anyone has the answer. And I'll come back to that context question I mentioned a moment ago. But I do think there are conversations both about the challenges in culture change in international schools, particularly what are the barriers that we need to overcome, but also the implications and the opportunities that it brings. Because as you said yourself, this conversation is now happening, and as someone with an interest about this, it's really exciting, because there are so many different variations to this, so many different interpretations. And what we want to do with the special interest group is really provide a forum for those conversations to happen, to share ideas, and I think in particular to share that particular perspective on challenges as well, because it's not easy, and it's quite nebulous. And Helen and I have talked many times before about I think one of the things that goes wrong in education is where we confine things to things that can be measured. You are not going to be in a position where your culture goes from a 3.8 to a 4.6 and you can say, look at the progress we've made. But that does also bring the question as to, well, how can you measure it then? What can you look at for the impact? So there's a whole variety of conversations that will be really interesting to have moving forward. I don't know what your thoughts on that, Helen.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things, if I just take a slight step back with your keynote, that was really interesting, was what you gave people a real insight into was the journey that you'd taken as a real school in real time. And, some of the wins and successes you'd experienced, but also some of the very real challenges that you'd experienced with that. And I think one of the key things, if we're going to, get any shift with culture, is we've got to talk about it. And I think the SIG group, for me, is a great way to talk about that and to enable school leaders to join with us in that conversation. And we actually had 2 team days at ECIS last week, and we were talking a lot about our why. And I think one of the key things with the SIG group is, and with our other groups and the organisation as a whole, is one of our functions, if you like, is to actually unite that collective wisdom about particular topics and to unite that experience so that people can begin to process it and turn it into something useful within their context. And I think the SIG group gives us a real opportunity to listen to lots of voices, diverse voices in very different contexts, to try and make sense of this thing that is pretty big, and to support schools to make sense of it within their own context.
Great. I agree, and it's been exciting. I mean, one of the many nice things about the conference is the amount of people that have reached out to me subsequently to start some conversations. I haven't had time to get back to them all, but again, the nice thing about the SIG is this will be the vehicle that we can draw everyone together and actually have those conversations moving forward. So yeah, that's exciting. Good.
And I think one of the things we'd be interested in, as we post this video, is just hearing some thoughts from people who weren't at the conference, people who were at the conference, people who are part of the ECIS community and who aren't, and maybe we'll get a really good thread of ideas starting to run with that.
Yeah, no, it will. It'll be exciting, really. And what's nice is that we've managed to get this far this academic year. As I say, there's the break coming up, but actually we've got a real clarity of where we're going to go straight from the off in next academic year as well. And it'll be interesting to see. Actually, one of the conversations that ECIS have already had with me is the possibility in 2 years of maybe doing another conference to draw it all together. So with that in mind, to actually begin to pull those things together, it will be interesting as well. So yeah, very interesting.
Yeah,
really
what might it look like?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so as we draw to summer, you've got a few weeks left, and I think many colleagues have as well. I think at this point, I think we would both wish you all a really well-earned break. But go on, Simon. We talk about books a lot when we chat. Tell me what you're taking away for your summer reading.
Well, this looks like I've pre-prepared it, and actually I haven't. But we were chatting earlier. I've literally, so again, at conference, it's going to sound like I don't do nothing but go to conferences, but I was recently at the COVIS conference, and Charles Faddle was talking about 4-dimensional education, which I will hold up, which is that, and I've started it. I've got it yesterday and started looking at that, so that's going to be part of my summer reading. But I can assure you it's not going to be all of my summer reading, because I'm not intending to spend all of my summer looking at curriculum and development. What about you?
So I think it's on my shelf here. I'm going to show you this one. I don't know if you can see it, but it's neurodiversity education, because this is something that I feel like I don't know a huge amount about, so I'm curious about it. And It's by Paul Ellis, Amanda Kirby, and Abby Osborne. And I've got a few of Paul Ellis's books on my shelf. I think I'm probably a super fan, but what he does is he tends to take a topic and just make it really digestible.
Right.
If it's something that's new to you. Well, what about your fiction reads though? Because again, we talked about, are you a Kindle reader or a book reader?
I am a Kindle reader. I very rarely go anywhere without my Kindle. It's and I do not read education books all the time. The one book I would recommend is A Gentleman from Moscow by Amor Towles, Amortowles, which is an absolutely fabulous book. It's brilliant. I've already read it. I won't be reading it again this summer, but it's really, really powerful. I'm a bit of a sucker for historical fiction, being a history teacher. So yeah, that would be my other recommendation. A really, really good book.
Okay, so I'm the antithesis of Simon because I still go for a real book with pages, although I have got a Kindle. Sometimes I'll take my Kindle with me. But we talked about our love of spy fiction, which is shared, but I'll offer something different. I quite like the kind of the modern retelling of sort of the Greek myths and legends. And I love the Pat Barker books, The Silence of the Girls and The Women of Troy. But there are lots of spin-offs from that, like Madeline Miller's Song of Achilles. Circe.
Song of Achilles is beautiful. I've read both Pat Barker books as well. I can highly recommend them too. So yeah, very, very good reads as well. Excellent. Helen, thanks for your time. And look, to everyone that's watching this, I hope you have a wonderful summer. It has been an incredible year. I was talking to some colleagues a couple of days ago. Certainly in Dubai, we started the year for half a term still in masks. And actually, it's incredible to think how far, irrespective of anything else that we've done, we've come to emerge from that horrific pandemic and the constraints that we lived under. And yet, what is so impressive, and this happens in so many different ways every year with schools, that despite the challenges and despite the barriers that are put in front of us, school leaders across the world manage to achieve so much success for their young people. So I hope when we get there, that all school leaders are able to look back both with a sense of satisfaction and pride on what has been another challenging year, but also safe in the knowledge that next year will be equally challenging, I'm sure. But I hope everyone does manage to get a really good break, and a very, very well-deserved break it will be. Okay, thank you ever so much. Bye-bye.